It all began with two couples living in the same peaceful compound nestled on the outskirts of the city, where the sound of laughter, the occasional greeting, and the quiet hum of everyday life created a sense of community. It was the kind of neighborhood where everyone knew each other's names, and the boundaries between neighbors and friends blurred into one big family. On one side of the compound, we have Kelvin and his wife, Nelo. They had just moved into their new apartment, a fresh start in a new place, hoping to build a stable life and future together. Kelvin was a successful businessman, well-respected in the area for his work selling building materials. He had established himself in the industry, running a small but thriving company that provided for them both. His business trips, meetings with suppliers, and deliveries filled his weekdays, but he always made sure to come home to his wife, Nelo, at the end of the day. Nelo, his beloved wife, was a beautiful woman with a quiet strength. She ran a small provision shop at home, selling everything from groceries to household essentials. It wasn't the most glamorous work, but it kept her busy and gave her a sense of independence. Nelo and Kelvin had always been a team, supporting each other in every venture. Their home was a reflection of their relationship, simple, cozy, filled with laughter, love, and dreams for the future. They had been married for a few years, and while they hadn't started a family yet, they were content. Life seemed perfect, uncomplicated, and filled with hope. They were good people, working hard to build their future and create a life they could be proud of. Now, living in the same compound, just a few doors down from Kelvin and Nelo, were Iyke and Nasa. On the outside, this couple appeared to be the perfect example of a happy Christian marriage. Iyke, a man in his mid-30s, was a deeply devoted Christian, someone who took his faith seriously and was actively involved in church activities. He was a man of prayer, often seen in the mornings before work, reading his Bible and leading family devotions. His commitment to his religion was unwavering, and many admired him for his dedication to his faith and his community. Iyke's work life was steady, and though it didn't bring in as much as Kelvin's business, he was content and felt blessed with his wife by his side. Nasa, his wife, was everything Iyke could have hoped for. She was beautiful, with long, flowing hair and a warm smile that could light up the room. Her gentle nature made her approachable, and her caring demeanor had earned her the love and respect of everyone in the compound. She was equally devoted to their marriage and their shared faith, often seen supporting Iyke at church events, volunteering at community gatherings, and looking after their small home. To the outside world, Nasa was the epitome of grace and virtue, and she played her role as Iyke's wife flawlessly. Together, Iyke and Nasa made the perfect Christian couple, faithful, loving, and seemingly inseparable. But while they appeared to have it all, what no one knew was that their lives would soon intertwine in a way that would shake the very foundation of their perfect world. Despite their outward appearance of happiness, each couple was about to face a test they could never have anticipated. The bond between Kelvin and Nasa, once rooted in admiration and friendly exchanges, was about to shift in ways neither of them could control. Little did they know, the harmony they shared with their neighbors would soon be shattered by a single, seemingly innocent moment, a moment that would lead to a dangerous and forbidden spark. This is where the story truly begins. Now, let's dig deeper into the moment when everything changed for Kelvin. You see, Kelvin had always respected Iyke and Nasa. They were the kind of couple that you could look up to, strong, loving, and deeply involved in their faith. They lived just next door, in the same compound, and for a long time, Kelvin had no reason to think anything about their relationship beyond friendship and mutual respect. But as time passed, something started to shift inside him. It wasn't just Nasa's beauty that caught his attention, it was the way she moved, the way she carried herself. There was a grace about her that was impossible to ignore. Her smile, soft yet genuine, seemed to have the power to light up the entire room, and the elegance with which she handled herself made her stand out in the crowd. But there was more. Nasa had a physical presence. Her figure was captivating. She had curves that commanded attention, and while Kelvin tried to keep his thoughts in check, he couldn't help but notice how effortlessly she looked stunning, no matter what she was doing. As the days went by, Those innocent observations turned into something more. What had once been admiration started to evolve into something deeper. He found himself stealing glances at her when she walked by, feeling a pull in his chest every time she passed. There was an undeniable attraction, one he couldn't ignore, no matter how hard he tried. And then one evening it happened. Kelvin had just come home after a long day of managing his building materials business, his mind weighed down with work stress. He was exhausted, but as the cool evening breeze flowed through his apartment, he decided to sit on the balcony to unwind. It was his little space, his moment of peace. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm glow over the compound. He could hear the sounds of the neighborhood settling into its usual rhythm, children playing, neighbors chatting. That's when he saw her. Nasa was walking home from work, as she did every evening, with her usual grace. But tonight, for the first time, Kelvin really saw her. The way the evening light played off her hair, the way her steps seemed to flow effortlessly with the rhythm of the world around her, there was something magnetic about it. Kelvin couldn't tear his eyes away. It wasn't just her beauty, it was something deeper. Something inside him stirred in a way it had never done before. He felt a rush of emotions, something that went beyond simple admiration. It was as though the world had paused for a moment, and in that instant, only Nasa existed. The air felt heavier, his heart raced, and a flood of thoughts rushed through his mind, each one more intense than the last. As she passed by his balcony, he tried to shake off the feeling, telling himself it was just a fleeting moment, that it was nothing. But deep down, Kelvin knew this wasn't just a passing attraction. It was the beginning of something dangerous. From that day on, something inside Kelvin shifted. Every time Nasa walked by, he found himself rushing to the door, pretending it was just for a friendly greeting. But, truthfully, he was hoping to see her, hoping for another chance to catch a glimpse of her, to exchange a few words, to feel that rush again. He tried to stay composed, but his mind was no longer focused on the business or his wife, Nelo. It was Nasa who occupied his thoughts, her smile, her laugh, the way she moved. Every time they spoke, it was like a little spark ignited inside him, and it became harder to ignore. Then, one day, the opportunity he had been waiting for presented itself. Kelvin was standing outside, alone, waiting for a call about a business deal. It was late afternoon, and the day was winding down. That was when he saw her again, Nasa, walking home from work. This time, she was alone. And it felt like the moment had arrived. His heart started pounding in his chest, and his mind raced with a mix of excitement and nervousness. Now or never, he thought to himself. Without thinking much about the consequences, he stepped forward. The moment felt surreal, almost like a scene from a movie. Kelvin met Nasa in the middle of the road. She smiled at him, as always, and greeted him warmly. But this time, Kelvin couldn't just smile and move on.
He had to say it.
He had to let her know how he felt, or at least let her know the impact she had on him. With his heart beating fast, he blurted out, "You know, you're incredibly beautiful. You have an amazing figure, and your smile, it's like it lights up the entire room." Nasa, who had always been friendly, smiled back. But this time, her smile lingered a little longer than usual, and there was something different in her eyes. A warmth, perhaps, or maybe it was curiosity. "Thank you, Kelvin," she said, her voice soft and kind. "You're too kind." But as she spoke, Kelvin couldn't help but notice the way her eyes twinkled. It was as if something had passed between them, a spark that neither of them could ignore. They exchanged phone numbers that evening. A simple act, yet it marked the beginning of a dangerous path. And from that moment, everything changed. The casual greetings turned into late-night conversations. The small talk evolved into intimate chats, and before they knew it, they were sharing parts of themselves they had never planned to reveal. And so, the spark that began that evening on the balcony grew into a fire. Neither Kelvin nor Nasa could escape the pull of what had started as an innocent exchange. They both knew deep down that they had crossed a line, but neither of them knew how far that line would take them, or the devastation it would cause. What was once a peaceful, harmonious life in the compound was about to be shattered by a secret that neither of them could undo. And that, my friends, is how the spark of betrayal was lit. Stay tuned for the next part of the story, where things take an even darker turn. If you're enjoying this narrative, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. As time passed, what started as casual conversations on WhatsApp quickly spiraled into something more. At first, their chats were innocent, compliments, friendly banter, and small talk about everyday things. But as the days went by, the messages grew more personal. Kelvin's compliments became more flattering, and NASA's responses started to carry a deeper, more intimate tone. Kelvin, a man who prided himself on being successful, felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. He felt alive, seen, and admired. NASA, on the other hand, found herself drawn to Kelvin's attention. Though she loved her husband Iyke, who was deeply devoted to his faith, something was missing in their marriage. The connection she had with Kelvin began to fill that void, even though she knew it was wrong. Now, let's be clear, Kelvin was not a saint. He had a wife, Nelo, whom he loved dearly. She was his partner in everything, but the connection he felt with NASA was undeniable. It wasn't just about attraction. It was about the way she made him feel seen, wanted, and admired. For the first time in a while, he was excited. He had always been the one in control, the businessman who never let his emotions get the better of him. But when it came to NASA, he lost himself. And so, their secret affair began. At first, it was just flirting, a game to them. But as the days turned into weeks, the lines between friendly banter and something deeper blurred. NASA would send him messages at night, telling him how her day went, and before long, their conversations shifted to more intimate topics. Every night, after the rest of the compound had gone to bed, Kelvin and NASA would meet in the shadows. In the cool stillness of the night, their stolen moments together became the only thing that mattered. They would find hidden corners of the compound, out of view of anyone who might be watching. These moments were quick, passionate, and most importantly, hidden from the eyes of the world. They shared kisses in dark hallways, secret glances when no one was around, and touches that set their hearts racing. It was dangerous, exciting in a way neither of them had experienced before. It wasn't just the physical act, it was the thrill of getting away with it. The secrecy, the adrenaline, the lies, they all became part of the allure. No one suspected a thing, not even Nelo, who still believed her marriage was strong, trusting her husband completely. Life, on the surface, went on as normal. Nelo continued to run her provision shop, and Kelvin went about his business during the day. But deep down, both Kelvin and NASA knew what they were doing was wrong. For NASA, there was a sense of guilt that weighed on her. She knew Iyke would never forgive her if he found out. But at the same time, she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward Kelvin. For Kelvin, the guilt didn't hit as hard at first. He justified his actions by telling himself that he was still committed to Nelo, that this was just a moment of weakness. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. The affair continued in secret, growing in intensity with each meeting. The stolen kisses became heated embraces, and their conversations turned into whispers of longing, desire, and passion. They were playing a dangerous game, but neither of them could stop. What started as a few stolen moments in the darkness of the night soon became the center of their lives. They were both living double lives, one in the light and the other in the shadows. And as much as they tried to ignore it, the tension built, the stakes grew higher, and the weight of their actions started to feel heavier than ever. It's always easy to justify a wrong when you think no one is watching. But eventually, the consequences catch up with you. For NASA and Kelvin, the lies they told, the choices they made, would come back to haunt them. But for now, in the secrecy of the night, they believed they were invincible. They were playing with fire, and neither of them realized just how hot it would get. Then came the turning point, the moment that would alter the course of everything. NASA invited Kelvin to an event that was meant to be about strengthening marriages, a special lecture designed to help couples improve intimacy and communication. It was an event for married couples to learn and grow together, to become closer, more connected. The event was meant to be wholesome, filled with lectures, discussions, and activities aimed at fostering love and trust within marriages. But for NASA and Kelvin, it was something else. It was an opportunity to continue their secret relationship, to be together in a space where no one knew the truth. Now, remember, this wasn't just any event. It was held in a luxury hotel, the kind where couples could spend a night away from the world, escaping into their own private bubble. And that's exactly what NASA and Kelvin did. As the event kicked off, the air was filled with discussions on marital intimacy, the importance of communication, and how to rekindle the flame of love. Couples were encouraged to participate, to ask questions, and to connect with one another on a deeper level. But for NASA and Kelvin, it was all a facade. They were pretending to be one of the many couples in attendance, acting as if everything was normal. Meanwhile, in the back of their minds, they both knew they weren't just there to learn about marriage. They were there to fuel their forbidden passion. During a break in the event, NASA and Kelvin excused themselves. Their hearts raced as they slipped away from the crowd, their footsteps quickening with the anticipation of what awaited them. The hotel had set up private rooms for couples to engage in more intimate activities after the lectures, spaces where they could continue the conversation in a more personal setting. And of course, that's where they headed, straight to one of those private rooms. They entered the room, the door closing softly behind them. The moment they were alone, everything else in the world seemed to fade away. The room, bathed in soft lighting, became their sanctuary, a place where no one could judge them, where their secret could continue without interruption. In that room, everything they had been hiding, the lust, the longing, the forbidden love, came to a head. They shared a passionate moment, their desire for each other finally breaking through the barriers they had set for so long. It wasn't just physical. It was emotional, intense, and everything they had both secretly craved but couldn't openly express. In that moment, they weren't two people pretending to be strangers in a crowd. They were two people who had allowed their hidden desires to surface, completely giving in to the heat of their affair. That night, in that hotel room, their bond deepened. It wasn't just a fling anymore. It was something far more complex, far more dangerous. They both knew this wasn't just about a physical attraction. They had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. But little did they know, this night would change everything. A few weeks later, NASA discovered she was pregnant. The news hit her like a wave, sweeping away any sense of control she had left. She had been so careful, so determined to keep her secret under wraps. But now, everything had changed. She was pregnant, and the baby she carried wasn't Iyke's. It was Kelvin's. Her heart raced as she thought about the implications. This was no longer a secret they could easily keep hidden. The physical evidence, the growing bump in her belly, would eventually give them away. But the most terrifying part of it all was the emotional burden that came with the pregnancy. How long could she live with this secret? How long could she keep up the facade of a loving marriage to Iyke while carrying another man's child? Every day, the guilt gnawed at her, pulling her deeper into a web of lies and deceit. And every day, she had to look Iyke in the eye, knowing that the life she had built with him was about to come crumbling down. It was a secret that NASA would have to keep hidden at all costs. She couldn't let Iyke find out. She couldn't face him, couldn't risk losing everything. But how long could she keep it from him? How long could she keep living this double life, loving her husband, but carrying the child of another man? The guilt was suffocating. And the truth was something NASA wasn't sure she could live with any longer. But in the back of her mind, there was one burning question that would not go away. Would she be able to keep this secret forever? Or would it all come crashing down around her? As the weeks passed, NASA found herself standing at a crossroads. She was trapped in a life she had created, a life of lies, guilt, and passion. Would she tell Iyke the truth? Or would she continue to hide behind the facade of a happy marriage? Would her love for Kelvin survive the reality of the situation, or would the weight of her choices crush everything she had built? The truth had a way of revealing itself, and as NASA's pregnancy progressed, it became harder and harder to keep the secret. It wasn't just about the baby anymore. It was about the lie that had grown between her and Iyke. a lie that could tear their world apart. As the months passed, the weight of Nasa's pregnancy became undeniable. The signs were clear. Her body was changing, her belly was growing, and there was no way to hide it anymore. She did her best to conceal it with loose clothing, but the truth was catching up with her. Nasa had been living in constant fear, knowing that sooner or later, Iyke would notice. Every day felt like a ticking time bomb, and she couldn't shake the guilt that weighed heavily on her heart. The secret that she had been carrying, the child growing inside her, which wasn't Iyke's, was gnawing at her, tearing her apart from within. The longer she kept it hidden, the more it felt like a betrayal not just to Iyke, but to herself. But then one day it happened. Iyke, who had always been attentive to every detail about his wife, noticed something. He had been busy with his church activities, his work, and his duties, but now something was different. His sharp eye caught the subtle changes in Nasa's appearance. Her belly, once flat and toned, was now undeniably round. The slight change in her gait, the way she carried herself, was no longer something she could disguise. It all came to a head one evening. Iyke, a man who had always been calm and composed, walked into their home and saw Nasa sitting on the couch, looking distant, lost in thought. The moment of confrontation was inevitable. He stood there for a moment, his eyes scanning Nasa's face, reading the guilt in her eyes even before she could say a word. "Nasa," he began, his voice low, almost shaking, "we need to talk. I know something's wrong." Nasa's heart raced. She couldn't keep up the charade any longer. The truth was out there, floating between them like an invisible barrier. With a heavy sigh, she lowered her head. "Iyke, I didn't know how to tell you," she whispered, barely above a breath. Ike's face hardened, a flicker of pain crossing his expression. "What is it, Nasa? What's going on?" Nasa's hands trembled as she placed them on her belly, the reality of the situation hitting her all at once. Her voice cracked as she spoke the words she never thought she would say. The baby isn't yours, Iyke. It's Kelvin's." There was a long silence that hung in the air, thick with the weight of the betrayal. Ike's face went pale, and his eyes darkened, filled with disbelief and hurt. The man he had trusted, the man he had called a friend, was the father of his wife's child. He couldn't fathom it. "Kelvin." Ike's voice was barely a whisper. "You're telling me that the man I trusted, the man I considered a friend, is the father of my wife's child?" His voice grew louder, filled with an intense mix of anger, betrayal, and disbelief. Nasa nodded, tears streaming down her face. She had never wanted to hurt Iyke. She loved him, but the mistake she had made was irreparable. Iyke stood there, frozen, as the truth crashed down on him like a wave. He couldn't breathe. The world around him seemed to shatter, his faith in everything he had built, the trust, the love, the vows, cracking beneath the weight of the betrayal. "I never thought I would be in this position," Iyke said, his voice shaking with emotion. "How could you, Nasa?
How could you do this to me?"
To us. The pain in his words was almost unbearable for Nasa to hear. She had destroyed the foundation of their marriage, and the man who had once loved her unconditionally was now looking at her with eyes full of hurt and confusion. Iyke paced back and forth in the room, trying to process the enormity of what had happened. His thoughts were scattered, racing. "How long?" he finally asked, his voice cold and distant. "A few months," Nasa admitted, her voice barely audible. Ike's eyes widened. He took a step back, as if physically distancing himself from her. The thought of his wife, his beloved Nasa, betraying him in such a cruel way, was more than he could bear. He had always believed in the sanctity of their marriage, in the vows they had taken before God. And now, here she was, carrying another man's child. "It's either you abort the baby, Nasa," Iyke said, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and desperation, "or you leave me. I cannot raise another man's child. I cannot live with this betrayal. I won't." The ultimatum was final, and the weight of his words crushed Nasa's spirit. She looked at him, torn between the man she had once loved and the child she was carrying. Her heart ached for Iyke. She never wanted to hurt him, but she couldn't bring herself to end the life growing inside of her. "Please, Iyke," she pleaded, her voice breaking. I can't abort this baby. I know what I've done, but I can't take away this child's life. I will always love you, but I made a mistake, and I can't undo it." Ike's eyes darkened further. He shook his head, clearly heartbroken. "You have to make a choice, Nasa. You either choose me and the life we had, or you choose this child and the man who fathered it. But you cannot have both. I will not live in a marriage built on lies." The ultimatum hung in the air, thick with finality. Nasa could feel the weight of the decision crushing her. She had already lost so much, her marriage, her self-respect, and now she was faced with the impossible choice. Would she stay with Iyke, the man she had been married to for years, or would she choose the child, the living, breathing reminder of her mistake? In the end, Nasa knew what she had to do. She couldn't betray her conscience, her heart, or the child she was carrying. She chose her baby. "I'm sorry, Iyke," she whispered, tears falling freely now. "I can't stay. I love you, but I can't lie to myself anymore." With those words, Nasa left the man she had once vowed to love forever. She packed her things, said goodbye to the life she had known, and walked away from the only world she had ever known. She chose to face the consequences of her actions alone, knowing that the future would be uncertain, but determined to make things right for her child. Iyke, left in the wreckage of his marriage, was left to pick up the pieces of his broken heart. The man who had been a pillar of faith, of trust, was now questioning everything he had believed in. His world had crumbled in an instant, and he was forced to navigate the aftermath of a betrayal so deep it could never be undone. Meanwhile, Kelvin's world was also falling apart. Nelo, his wife, had found out about the affair. The revelation hit her like a wave, shocking, overwhelming, and completely unexpected. The pain of discovering that the man she loved, the man she had trusted with her heart and her future, had not only cheated on her, but had gone so far as to impregnate their neighbor was too much for her to bear. The betrayal cut deep. The thought of Nasa, a woman she had seen daily, someone who had been so close to their family, carrying Kelvin's child, it was a betrayal that tore apart the very foundation of their marriage. The shame, the humiliation, was unbearable. And then came the public humiliation. The compound that had once felt like a safe, welcoming space now felt like a constant reminder of her husband's infidelity. Everywhere she looked, she saw the people who knew the truth, people who had once smiled and waved at her, now whispering behind closed doors. The judgment was deafening. Nelo couldn't stay there anymore. She couldn't face the stares, the whispers, and the painful reminder of what her husband had done. The betrayal was too much to process, too much to overlook. Despite the love she had for Kelvin, despite the years they had spent building their life together, trust was something she couldn't easily rebuild, not after such a deep betrayal. In the dead of the night, Nelo packed her things. The once warm, shared space now felt cold, distant, and foreign. She could no longer bring herself to be in that house, that compound, or even in that life anymore. It was as though everything had been shattered in an instant, and there was no way to piece it back together. She left. The moment she stepped out of the door, it felt like a chapter had closed in her life, one that she never imagined she'd have to walk away from.
But she had to.
And with the decision to leave, came a vow that she would never set foot in that compound again. She couldn't bring herself to face Kelvin, or Nasa, or even the neighbors who had unknowingly become part of this betrayal. The pain was too raw. The sting of Kelvin's lies and the betrayal of their marriage were too fresh. Her love for him was still there, buried beneath the anger, the hurt, and the disappointment. But it wasn't enough. The trust that once anchored their relationship was now gone, and without it, there was nothing left. Nelo needed space to heal, to find herself again, and to rebuild her broken heart. Kelvin, devastated by her decision, didn't know what to do. The reality of what he had done began to sink in. He had lost the woman he loved, his partner, his best friend. He realized, too late, the gravity of his actions. His betrayal had torn apart the one thing that mattered most to him. For days, weeks even, Kelvin tried everything he could to get Nelo back. He couldn't accept that he had broken their bond so completely. He called her, he sent her messages, and he begged for forgiveness. He promised to change, to make things right, to rebuild their relationship. But Nelo, heartbroken and wounded, remained resolute. She couldn't forgive him, not yet. The damage was too deep. Every time she thought about the betrayal, every time she remembered the pain of discovering the affair, her heart broke all over again. She couldn't trust him anymore. And without trust, what was left? It wasn't that she didn't want to forgive him. It was that she needed time. Time to heal. Time to rediscover herself, and time to figure out whether or not she could ever trust him again. She had given him her all, and he had broken her in a way she never imagined. Eventually, after much soul-searching, Nelo agreed to meet with Kelvin. The pain was still there, but she knew that if there was ever a chance to rebuild their marriage, they needed to talk. The road to forgiveness would be long, and it would never be the same as it was before. The scar of betrayal would linger forever, a constant reminder of the pain they both had endured. Kelvin, realizing that this would be a battle, didn't back down. He kept fighting for her, kept showing her how sorry he was, kept doing whatever he could to prove that he would never make the same mistake again. But Nelo was cautious. She knew that forgiveness wouldn't erase the past. It wouldn't make everything go back to the way it was before. The trust would have to be rebuilt, piece by piece, and that would take time, a lot of time. She wasn't sure if they could ever be the same again, but she agreed to try. Their journey to rebuild their relationship was filled with tension, with moments of silence, with long conversations about what went wrong and what needed to change. But the truth was, things would never be the same. The deep betrayal had left a mark on both of them, one that would never truly fade. The trust that had been so easily shattered would take years to rebuild, if it could even be rebuilt at all. In the end, Nelo chose to stay in the marriage, but the road ahead was uncertain. She knew that her heart had been scarred, and that forgiveness, while possible, would take time. Kelvin knew that he had to prove himself to her every day, not just for her forgiveness, but for the chance to rebuild what they had lost. But as they continued to navigate the delicate journey of rebuilding their marriage, they both knew one thing for sure. The past would always haunt them, but it was up to them to decide if they could heal from it. And that, my friends, was the hardest part. Years passed. Time, they say, has a way of healing, but not without leaving scars. Kelvin and Nelo, though still childless, moved far away from the compound where it all began. A fresh start, they hoped, would help them rebuild their marriage. But while the walls of their new apartment were fresh and unmarked, the pain of the past remained. The betrayal Kelvin had committed haunted them both, though they worked hard to push through it. Their love had been tested in ways they hadn't imagined, and they both knew it would never be the same. Still, they clung to each other, growing in love, but always with a quiet awareness of the cracks that had formed in their relationship. For Nasa, the road to healing was even more complex. She had delivered Kelvin's child, and as much as she loved the baby, the situation felt like a bittersweet reminder of her fractured marriage. Iyke, her devoted husband, had forgiven her, but he couldn't bring himself to accept the child as his own. The emotional weight of that decision weighed heavily on Nasa. She knew she had hurt her husband deeply, but she also knew she couldn't abandon the child she had brought into the world. For Nasa, there was an unspoken understanding. This child was a consequence of her choices, and she could never erase the past. But she loved the child deeply and, in a way, the baby became her redemption. She poured all her love into caring for him, knowing that her life would always carry the stain of her betrayal, but also hoping she could find peace. Iyke, despite his hurt and his moral convictions, eventually came to terms with the situation. He continued to live by his Christian values, attending church regularly and focusing on his spiritual growth. He remained faithful to Nasa, although his love for her was now tempered by the reality of their past. The pain of her affair never fully dissipated, but Iyke chose to forgive her, even though he made it clear that he would never accept the child as his own. As for Nasa, the internal struggle she faced was one of the toughest things she had ever endured. She couldn't force Iyke to accept the child, but she also knew she couldn't abandon her own flesh and blood. And so, after months of uncertainty and heartache, Nasa made the decision to return to Iyke's house. It wasn't easy. There were long, painful conversations and soul-searching, but she returned to him, hoping they could rebuild what they had lost. In the years that followed, Nasa and Iyke worked through their issues, slowly rebuilding their marriage. Iyke may not have accepted the baby as his own, but he didn't walk away from Nasa. They had 2 more children together, and as the years went by, their bond grew stronger. Nasa learned to embrace the love and forgiveness Iyke had offered, and Iyke learned to forgive himself for not fully accepting the child. It wasn't perfect, but they had a family, and that, in the end, was enough. Meanwhile, Kelvin and Nelo, after their years of struggle and reflection, made a decision that would change their lives forever. They had always wanted children, but after the affair and the betrayal, they had decided to put their focus on healing. However, when the opportunity arose to take Nasa's child into their home, they couldn't turn their back on him. Kelvin, in his own way, felt a deep responsibility for the child. After all, he was the one who had caused the upheaval in Nasa's life. And so, Kelvin and Nelo took in Nasa's child, giving him a loving home. This was a gesture of redemption, a way to make up for the pain Kelvin had caused. It wasn't easy, and the child would always carry the mark of the past, but they both loved him as their own. The baby grew into a bright, curious little boy, and though he didn't know the full story, he knew he was loved. As for Nelo, she had forgiven Kelvin, though it wasn't a clean, easy forgiveness. It was one that came with time, with effort, and with a lot of heartache. The wound had healed, but the scar remained. They now had 3 children of their own, but there was always an understanding between them. The past was never far away. Their family was filled with love, yes, but it was a love that had been hard-earned, a love that had survived betrayal and come out the other side stronger. Though Nelo and Kelvin had finally built the family they had always dreamed of, they knew the past would always linger in the background. The lessons they had learned, the importance of trust, the weight of their choices, would stay with them forever. They had rebuilt their marriage, but the foundation was now different, tempered by the truth and the mistakes of the past. And as for Nasa and Iyke, their story was not without its own complexities. Nasa had returned to Iyke, and although they had a more peaceful life, their marriage was never the same. They had 2 more children, but Iyke's refusal to accept the child Nasa had with Kelvin remained a silent barrier between them. Nasa had to come to terms with the fact that she would never be able to undo the past, but she could still build a future. She found peace in the family they had together, even if the scars of betrayal would never fully fade. This story of betrayal, love, and forgiveness is a reminder that life is complicated. Sometimes, the choices we make, especially in moments of weakness, can have consequences that affect not just us, but those we love. Both couples had to navigate a painful journey, one filled with heartache, tough decisions, and self-discovery. In the end, they both found their way back to each other, but their paths were forever altered. They learned that love doesn't always come easily. It's forged in the fire of mistakes, and it grows through the challenges we face. Thank you for watching today's video. If you enjoyed this emotional roller coaster, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more incredible stories like this. And remember, life is full of twists and turns, but it's how we deal with them that defines who we are. Until next time, take care.